It was a cold morning in Levittown, Pennsylvania, when Denise Mohn returned to her family home, expecting the same peaceful routine. Her husband, Michael, should have been inside preparing his coffee, but as she stepped through the door, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, the air too still. She called his name. No answer. She moved slowly through the hallway, heart pounding. What she would find next would change everything. The door to the bathroom was slightly ajar. With trembling hands, she pushed it open. What she saw made her collapse to the floor, screaming. Her husband, the man she had shared her life with for decades, was gone. Not just in spirit, but in the most horrifying physical sense. The scene before her was something no human being should ever witness, and yet she had to. Her home had become a crime scene, her world unrecognizable. Emergency services arrived within minutes. First responders tried to remain composed, but the trauma etched into their faces told the truth. Michael Mohn had been killed, not in an accident, not in a robbery, but in a deeply violent and personal act. His body showed signs of extreme trauma, and there were clear indications that the event had been planned. The house, once filled with family memories, now reeked of fear, grief, and devastation. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't just physical, it was digital. While police secured the home, word began to spread online. A video had surfaced. A man speaking into the camera, cold and composed. He spoke of justice, betrayal, and punishment. Authorities quickly realized the speaker was Justin Mohn, Michael's own son. And the video wasn't a confession. It was something darker, a calculated public statement following a private act of destruction. For hours, the video remained online. People who saw it described it as one of the most chilling things they'd ever witnessed. There was no shouting, no rage, just a man calmly explaining why he had done what he did, and why he believed it was justified. He referenced political ideology, personal betrayal, and a warped sense of duty. Law enforcement scrambled to have the footage removed, but not before it was shared, reposted, and analyzed by thousands. The tragedy had already shocked a neighborhood. Now it was spreading across the country, not just as a brutal crime, but as a disturbing message. A man had taken justice into his own hands and broadcasted it with precision. Michael Mohn was no longer just a victim of violence. He had become the symbol of a dangerous ideology and the first target of his own son's descent into darkness. The video was just over 14 minutes long, raw, unedited, and haunting. Justin Mohn sat before a camera in what appeared to be a dimly lit room, surrounded by printed documents, American flags, and handwritten notes. His eyes were focused, unwavering. His voice never trembled. He wasn't confessing. He was explaining, justifying, declaring. It wasn't just a message, it was a warning, a manifesto presented through a lens of complete conviction. From the first minute, viewers knew something was deeply wrong. Justin referred to his father not as a parent, but as a traitor to the Constitution. He described the crime as a necessary act, one that he carried out as a citizen in response to what he claimed were acts of betrayal. His words were soaked in political extremism, invoking conspiracies, distorted interpretations of law, and twisted patriotism. The calmness with which he spoke made it even more disturbing. There was no visible emotion in his face, no tears, no anger, just certainty. In his mind, this wasn't murder, it was a mission. He quoted historical documents, referenced obscure legal codes, and painted himself as a guardian of liberty. The tone wasn't panicked or unstable. It was rehearsed. He had prepared for this. He wanted people to watch, and he wanted them to believe that what he had done was not only right, but righteous. Law enforcement worked urgently to remove the video. YouTube's systems flagged it within hours, but by then it had already spread. Copies were downloaded, uploaded to forums, and dissected by commentators. News outlets caught wind of the story, and before long, the name Justin Mohn was trending nationwide. What had started as a local tragedy was now a national emergency. A son had taken his father's life and weaponized the aftermath. The video was quickly classified as potential domestic terrorism. Authorities recognized the language and symbols Justin used. They aligned with ideologies known to radicalize individuals online. While he had acted alone, investigators feared the video could inspire others. It wasn't just a digital confession, it was propaganda. And it carried the kind of emotional charge that made it all the more dangerous in an already divided climate. By the time the video was pulled, thousands had seen it. Some reported it, some shared it out of shock. Others, more disturbingly, applauded it. The ripple effect of Justin's act had begun. He hadn't just committed a crime, he had crafted a message. A calculated attempt to redefine justice through the lens of personal vengeance and political delusion. And now, the race to stop him before more damage was done had truly begun. Long before the crime, Justin Mohn was already slipping away from the world around him. He wasn't loud, he wasn't violent. He was quiet, withdrawn, reflective, and increasingly isolated. Born in 1990, Justin grew up in a stable home. His father worked in federal engineering, his mother stayed involved with the family, and his sister built a life of her own. But Justin never quite fit in. And as the years passed, his solitude deepened into something darker. In his 20s, he started spending nearly all his time online. What began as casual browsing turned into full immersion in fringe websites, conspiracy forums, and political echo chambers. He absorbed everything: alternative history, theories about government takeovers, secret agendas. His worldview narrowed, then hardened. In online spaces where paranoia was normalized and reinforced, Justin found community, not with friends, but with faceless usernames who shared his fears. Friends and former classmates later described him as smart but off. He wasn't aggressive in public, but in private, his beliefs had become extreme. He spoke about the Constitution like it was scripture and viewed government institutions with deep suspicion. He believed the world was falling apart and that only people like him could fix it. When challenged, he didn't argue. He retreated further into himself and deeper into the rabbit holes of the internet. His father, Michael, had long worked for the very institutions Justin now despised. That contrast became unbearable for him. Over time, Justin's disillusionment turned inward, toward his own family. He began to see Michael not as a father, but as part of the system he hated. He saw complicity where there was none. And slowly, his private resentment grew into a distorted sense of purpose. He didn't just disagree with his father, he viewed him as a threat. Investigators later found handwritten notes in Justin's room, not diaries, but declarations. Long ranting pages where he listed perceived injustices, grievances, and distorted interpretations of law. Phrases like patriotic duty and moral cleansing were repeated. They weren't the writings of someone out of control. They were structured, deliberate, obsessed. Justin hadn't lost his mind. He had built a new one, brick by brick, out of fear, ideology, and isolation. What makes this case even more unsettling is that no one saw it coming. There were no violent outbursts, no arrests, no clear signs of danger. Justin's descent into radical thought was silent, digital, and deeply internalized. But when it finally reached the surface, it did so with full force. In the eyes of the law, it was murder. In his own mind, it was something else. And in that chilling disconnect lies the true terror of what Justin Mohn became. As the video spread across the internet, law enforcement agencies across Pennsylvania and beyond sprang into action. Justin Mohn had vanished from the scene of the crime, and every hour he remained free added tension to an already explosive case. His name and photo were broadcast across state lines. Officers feared he was armed, possibly dangerous, and potentially planning something more. But what they discovered next was even more unsettling. He had planned for this. Justin didn't flee in panic. He moved methodically. Investigators found evidence that he had pre-packed a vehicle with food, water, supplies, and personal writings. His digital activity showed recent searches about evading law enforcement and survival tactics. This wasn't a crime of passion followed by chaos. It was deliberate. From the message to the escape, everything had been calculated. For law enforcement, the situation now had elements of both manhunt and counterterrorism. With the help of YouTube's internal data and IP tracking, authorities traced the upload location of the video to an area not far from the Mohn residence. Drones were deployed. K-9 units swept nearby woods. And after nearly 48 hours of intense searching, Justin was located in a wooded area near Langhorne, Pennsylvania, roughly 10 miles from the crime scene. He had set up a small camp, covered by a camouflage tarp, surrounded by journals and printed documents. The arrest was quiet. Officers approached carefully, unsure of how he would respond, but Justin didn't resist. He stood calmly, raised his hands, and reportedly said, "You're late." It was not the reaction of someone afraid or remorseful. It was the statement of a man who believed he had completed a mission. For the officers who led him away in handcuffs, the moment was surreal. They had apprehended a killer, but also a symbol of something more troubling. Back at the station, Justin refused to answer most questions. He asked for a copy of the Constitution and declined legal counsel at first. In a brief, chilling statement to a detective, he said, "This wasn't violence. It was necessary correction." The tone was flat, unshaken. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a performance of belief. To him, the law had failed, and he had taken it into his own hands. That belief would shape the trial that was about to begin. The news of his arrest made national headlines. Photos of the campsite, clips of the video, statements from stunned neighbors. The country watched as a small-town crime morphed into a national debate about ideology, radicalization, and domestic extremism. The manhunt was over, but the deeper investigation into Justin's mind, his motives, and the system that failed to stop him was only just beginning. The courtroom in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, filled with an atmosphere thick with anticipation and grief. Family members, journalists, and community members gathered to witness the legal reckoning of Justin Mohn. The man who had shocked the nation with a single video now sat motionless, guarded and silent, his eyes fixed forward. There would be no jury. Justin had waived that right, choosing instead to face judgment from a single figure, Judge Stephen A. Core. The decision for a bench trial raised eyebrows. Many believed it was strategic. A jury might be swayed emotionally by the nature of the crime and the disturbing video. A judge, in contrast, would focus solely on the law. Prosecutors charged Justin with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and acts classified under Pennsylvania's domestic terrorism statutes. It was one of the first times the state would pursue this level of charge against an individual acting alone, without affiliation to a known group. The prosecution's case was precise and devastating. They played the entire video in court. They presented Justin's written notes, browser history, and supply preparations. Forensic experts testified to the level of planning involved. Detectives outlined the timeline of the crime and the escape. The picture they painted was clear. Justin didn't snap. He executed a plan. His intent wasn't just personal, it was ideological, and that intent elevated the crime from a family tragedy to a matter of national concern. The defense did not deny what happened. Instead, they argued that Justin believed he was acting under a distorted but genuine interpretation of civic duty. They leaned heavily on his isolation, his obsessive consumption of online content, and his mental state. They asked the court to consider whether he understood the consequences of his actions, and whether he could separate delusion from justice. But as the evidence piled up, that argument seemed increasingly thin. One of the most heartbreaking moments came when Denise Mohn, Justin's mother, took the stand. She described the horror of finding her husband and the shock of learning that her son was responsible. Her voice trembled. The room fell silent. "He wasn't always like this," she said. "But something changed. He stopped being my son long before that day." Her words pierced the silence, a reminder that this case was not just legal, it was deeply human. After 4 days of proceedings, the prosecution rested its case. The judge had seen enough. The video, the writings, the planning, they left no room for doubt. The courtroom sat in stillness as the final arguments concluded. Everyone present knew the verdict was inevitable. But even so, nothing could prepare them for the cold finality of what was coming next. A sentence not only for Justin, but for everything he had tried to stand for. On July 11, 2025, the courtroom fell silent as Judge Stephen A. Core delivered his verdict. With calm authority, he found Justin Mohn guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder and domestic terrorism. There was no audible reaction from the defendant. No tears, no outburst. Just a man sitting still, listening to the final judgment on the path he had chosen. The courtroom, however, held its collective breath. It wasn't just a legal conclusion. It was a moment of moral reckoning. The sentence was swift and absolute. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. served in 2 consecutive terms. The judge made it clear that Justin's crime went far beyond the act of taking a life. It was an attack on the most fundamental human bond, between parent and child, wrapped in the guise of political righteousness. This court does not recognize personal ideology as a license to kill, Judge Kaur said. You were not protecting freedom, you destroyed it. As the words echoed through the courtroom, Justin remained stone-faced. Prosecutors emphasized that the crime had been premeditated, deliberate, and weaponized. The video was not just a digital record. It was a carefully structured act of psychological warfare, designed to shock, provoke, and incite. In their closing, they stated plainly, this was not justice, this was theater, a twisted performance staged with blood and ideology. The Mohn family was given the opportunity to speak. Justin's sister stood before the court and delivered a searing victim impact statement. You were my brother, she said, but that person no longer exists. You betrayed us. You destroyed everything. Her voice cracked, but her words were resolute. She spoke of the sleepless nights, the trauma of seeing her father reduced to a headline, and the devastation their mother now lived with daily. There is no justice that can fix this, she said, but at least there is truth. Denise Mohn chose not to speak that day. Instead, she sat quietly, clutching a photo of Michael taken years earlier, a reminder of better days. She didn't look at Justin. She had already said her goodbyes. What remained was grief and a hollow silence where a family once lived. For her, the courtroom was not a place of closure, only confirmation of what she already knew. Her son was gone, even if he still breathed. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. News headlines lit up across the country. Man convicted in ideologically motivated family murder. Life sentence in landmark domestic terror case. But behind the sensationalism was a darker truth. The crime had left a void no verdict could ever fill. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. But for the lives left behind, the healing had barely begun. In the weeks following the verdict, investigators released portions of the digital evidence collected from Justin Mohn's devices. What they found painted a disturbing picture of a man consumed by fear, anger, and distorted belief. His laptop was filled with documents labeled things like traitor list, citizen justice, and federal lies. He had downloaded articles from conspiracy websites, bookmarked obscure legal blogs, and written manifestos that blended paranoia with misguided patriotism. Many of these writings read like sermons, angry monologues laced with buzzwords about freedom, control, and betrayal. He wrote about cleansing the nation, punishing those who violated their oaths, and restoring a moral code that only he seemed to understand. There were no signs of satire or confusion. His words were clear, calculated, and purposeful. Each page was a window into a mind that had replaced reality with ideology, a private echo chamber bound by obsession. One of the most chilling discoveries was an unreleased video found on his hard drive. Titled, "If This Is My End," it showed Justin speaking directly to the camera, stating that he had done what had to be done, and that history would vindicate him. His tone was calm, even serene. There were no apologies, no doubt. He viewed himself not as a criminal, but as a soldier in a moral battle no one else could see. That detachment was perhaps the most terrifying part of all. The FBI described his writings and digital behavior as structured delusion. Unlike spontaneous outbursts of violence, Justin's crime had been nurtured over time. He had fed it daily, through reading, writing, and isolation. The line between thought and action had eroded completely. By the time he carried out the crime, he had convinced himself it was not only necessary, it was noble. That transformation wasn't sudden, it was cultivated. Experts who reviewed the material concluded that Justin didn't fit the profile of a mentally unstable offender in the traditional sense. He wasn't confused or disoriented. He was dangerously focused. His worldview, though deeply flawed, had become a framework through which every action, even the destruction of his own family, made sense to him. He had built a private reality, brick by brick, until it was strong enough to replace everything else. For the investigators, it was both enlightening and alarming. Justin's descent didn't begin with violence. It began with belief. What started as quiet frustration evolved into ideological fixation, and ultimately, into something irreversible. The case became a modern cautionary tale, Not about sudden madness, but about how slowly, invisibly, someone can disappear into an idea, and how, when they finally act on it, the world is left asking how no one saw it coming. Before the tragedy, the Mohn family appeared stable, even ordinary. Michael was a respected federal employee, a quiet man who enjoyed routine and lived with integrity. Denise was a devoted wife and mother who kept the home steady and warm. Their children had grown up in a house that, by all appearances, offered structure and care. But what no one could see was the invisible rift forming in the mind of their son, a rift that would one day destroy them from within. The aftermath of the crime left the family shattered beyond recognition. Denise, once surrounded by the life she and Michael built together, now walked through silence and absence. Her home, once filled with memories, had become a monument to grief. She moved away, unable to stay where the walls still whispered what had happened. Friends described her as distant, her eyes heavy with pain. Her life had been reduced to before and after, and the after was unbearable. Justin's sister, too, broke all ties. In court, she had faced her brother one last time and said goodbye to the version of him she remembered. In the following months, she moved across the country, changed her last name, and withdrew from all public attention. In an open letter released through her attorney, she wrote, "My brother is no longer alive to me. The person I knew is gone. I mourn for my father and my family, but not for him." The community around them struggled to process what had happened. Neighbors who once waved at the Mohns across the street now passed the house in silence. Some left flowers, others kept their distance. The crime had pierced the illusion that horror lives far away. This had happened next door. It was no longer just a headline. It was personal. It was a wound that wouldn't heal. A reminder that sometimes the threat doesn't come from outside. It grows inside. Denise, in rare interviews, declined to speak about Justin directly. Her focus remained on honoring her husband's memory, a man she described as humble, principled, and endlessly patient. "He didn't deserve any of this," she said once, softly. No one did. Her pain was quiet, private, but it echoed through everything she did. In a single act, she had lost not just her partner, but the child she raised and loved. And there would never be closure, only survival. What the Mohn family endured cannot be measured. There were no words, no verdict, no justice that could restore what had been taken. In the end, Justin Mohn didn't just end a life. He ended a family. He burned the bridge between past and future, leaving only ashes where memories used to live. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy of pain that no sentence could ever erase. As the dust settled, the case of Justin Mohn continued to echo far beyond the courtroom. Across the country, his name was spoken in newsrooms, classrooms, and homes. It wasn't just the crime itself that disturbed people. It was the message behind it. The video had been removed, the sentence handed down, but the questions remained. How could someone go so far? How could a son commit something so unimaginable and believe it was justice? Public response was divided. Most viewed Justin as a cold, calculated killer driven by dangerous ideology. But in some dark corners of the internet, others began referring to him in disturbing terms, not as a monster, but as a martyr. Forums and fringe sites analyzed his words, dissected his beliefs, and praised his conviction. It was a chilling reminder that once something is posted online, it can never be fully erased. The message had spread, and parts of it were still being heard. Lawmakers and cybersecurity experts took note. Behind closed doors, discussions were held about how individuals like Justin become radicalized in digital isolation. The Department of Homeland Security issued internal reviews. Local agencies reevaluated their ability to detect early warning signs of ideological extremism. Schools and mental health professionals were urged to pay closer attention to young people exhibiting withdrawal and obsession with conspiracy content. Justin's name became shorthand for a growing concern, the lone actor fueled by online delusion. In Levittown, life tried to move forward. The Mohn residence remained empty, its windows dark and its silence heavy. A few neighbors planted trees to block the view. Others avoided the street altogether. Children whispered about the house as if it were cursed. For the community, healing meant forgetting, but forgetting proved impossible. The tragedy had carved itself into the neighborhood's identity. It wasn't just something that happened there. It had become part of what it was. Some tried to turn the pain into purpose. Churches hosted forums on grief and radicalization. Schools added programming around emotional resilience and online awareness. Civic groups organized mental health outreach events. Small steps, yes, but meaningful ones. The hope was that by addressing the roots of the issue, another life might be spared. Another family might be saved. But for the Mohns, that hope came far too late. The case became more than just a crime story. It became a reflection of where we are, what we fear, and what we allow to grow unnoticed. Justin Mohn didn't fit the classic image of a villain, and that's what made him so terrifying. He looked like any other young man, but inside, a storm was brewing. And when it finally erupted, it changed lives forever. Not just those close to him, but those watching from afar, trying to understand how it all went so wrong. There are stories that stay with us not because of how loud they are, but because of how deeply they cut. The case of Justin Mohn is one of those stories. It didn't begin with a bang or a scream. It began in silence, in a quiet house with a quiet man, slowly losing himself to a world only he could see. And when that world took over, it didn't just destroy a life. It destroyed a family, a neighborhood, and the illusion that some horrors only happen far away. What makes this case different is its intimacy. Justin didn't target strangers. He didn't choose a random victim. He chose the man who raised him, a father who provided, protected, and tried to understand, only to be recast in his son's mind as an enemy. That transformation, from love to hate, from home to battlefield, is where the true terror lies, because it shows how ideology, unchecked and nurtured in isolation, can override even the most sacred bonds. Michael Mohn wasn't just a victim of violence. He was a victim of a belief system gone unchecked, of silence, of digital radicalization, of a world that sometimes confuses conviction with truth. And Justin? He became the product of that confusion. Not a spontaneous offender, but a methodical, self-righteous executioner of his own delusion. His legacy isn't just that of a murderer, it's that of a mirror, reflecting what happens when reality is replaced with obsession. For law enforcement, educators, and families alike, the case is a call to action. It reminds us that warning signs are not always loud. They can hide in isolation, in changed behavior, in the quiet surrender of someone to a world no one else can see. Justin Mohn didn't just commit a crime. He carried out a belief. And the scariest part is, he believed it was right. That kind of thinking doesn't start with weapons. It starts with words. We often search for meaning in tragedy, but sometimes meaning isn't about understanding. It's about remembering. Remembering what was lost, remembering what was ignored, and remembering what we must never allow to happen again. The case of Justin Mohn is not just a true crime. It's a true warning that in the age of endless connection, disconnection can still destroy everything.